In September of 2025, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney held a press conference about how he and his party were going to finally tackle Canada's housing crisis. Now, his speech wasn't that important, but what was important was the giant conspiracy that would unfold because of something in the background. So what was going on here? Let's take a look. Enhance. Enhance again. Enhance again. Something seems a little bit off, but I can't tell what it is quite yet. A few days later, a user on Twitter goes to investigate this construction site where this press conference was held. And when they went to the site, there was nothing there. Weird. What was also quite strange was that a week before this press conference was held, there was also nothing there at all. Weird again. This is probably just a Twitter troll, or maybe they went to the wrong place and had good intentions, and that's where this story should have died. However, Twitter would not let it die. Many users started tweeting out, how could there be nothing at this site days after the press conference was held and it was clearly a construction site? I mean, look at all those houses under construction in the background. Those are clearly real houses, right? Right? But eventually this story would fade from the limelight and disappear. Until a few days ago. That was when reporters out of Ottawa allegedly discovered a weird expenditure from the HICC, Canada's housing branch of the government. They noticed a $32,000 expenditure for the backdrop of Mark Carney's housing announcement. The HICC also said homes in the backdrop have since been disassembled. Wait, that can't be. Did the Canadian government really pay to temporarily make fake houses for a photo op? Were the Twitter users correct? Did the Canadian government construct a Potemkin village, where, if you don't know, Grigory Potemkin once built fake settlements to impress Catherine the Great on her journey to Crimea in the 1700s? Oh, the things men will do to impress a lady. But is Mark Carney in this case the new Grigory Potemkin? Now when you add on this $32,000 admission from the HICC and the fact that the Canadian government will never do anything to actually build houses for people who actually need them, jackpot, we got them. Case closed, sort of.
What do I find out, man? What do I find out? There is no Pepe Sylvia. The man does not exist.
You see, there were some articles on this topic from more mainstream sources over the last few weeks that were saying that the claim that the backdrop was completely fake was misleading. But that also raised my suspicion. Why would these articles use the word misleading and not say lie or completely fake? Let's investigate. The co-founder and CEO of Caven Homes, Frank Cairo, said the government approached them with the intention of showing the manufacturing potential of modular homes through prototype builds. The prototypes Carney toured during the announcement are real homes, Cairo said, but it wasn't meant to be misunderstood as a permanent housing development site. Well then, why make it look like a permanent development site for Mr. Carney's press conference? Mr. Cairo then added there was no added cost in doing this as it synergized with our existing process. Well, the $32,000 says otherwise. You see, this entire ordeal essentially summarizes the problem with Canada. People like to present Canada as very nice on the surface, but really it's a giant facade in reality. To many in the outside world, Canada may seem like a land of infinite polar bears and infinite wealth, when in reality it's a land of nearly extinct polar bears and dwindling wealth. Unless you're Mark Carney, who is a very wealthy Wall Street banker who I thought the left wing was supposed to distrust after 2008, but that is besides my point. You see, many Canadians are realizing that Canada is pretty much one giant mirage, one giant Potemkin village with a ticking time bomb behind it, which is a large reason why Canadians are leaving at a record pace. Let's take you back to 2023, a time when Canada was flourishing with Emperor Trudeau at the helm. Many Canadians were nice and cozy, recovering from the pandemic era. Lots of positive news about having the highest immigration numbers in the history of the Western world, and how no one should question this, and how housing prices were becoming extraordinarily high, therefore ensuring the sick and elderly homeowners had a nice retirement cushion, and how no one should question this. But then an article came out on December 19th of 2023 from a reputable housing and economic news source called Better Dwelling. And what was strange was that the article said that Canada was not doing amazing. In fact, it said that a record amount of Canadians were leaving the country. But how could that be? Are you telling me that Canadians maybe did not have the most thriving country in the world? This was a shocking revelation to Canadians, or at least the Canadians who owned homes and are above the age of 50. How could someone not love Canada? They said. I was able to work a steady job for 30 years, work really hard, and buy a house. Young people today are just too lazy these days, they said. These types of Canadians were astounded. This was the first strike towards their ideology, and many more strikes would come. As it turns out, open borders and not running security checks on people entering the country, that was a bad idea. Letting the majority of violent criminals out on bail or have their cases stayed or withdrawn, bad idea. Having not just the cost of housing, but the cost of everything, even household appliances and hearing aids, all of that skyrocket, that's a bad idea. Canada became one giant bad idea after another. More than most other countries in the world experiencing similar issues at the time. Things got so bad that by early 2025, the Prime Minister of Canada, who was still Mr. Justin Trudeau, had the lowest popularity rating for any Prime Minister in the history of the country. The leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, was riding high, looking to sail into the Prime Minister's seat within the next year, and Canada would finally have a new path. Sure, that path may or may not work, but it was at least worth a shot. But wait, what's that? Do you hear that? That's right, a giant orange rocket just hit the CN Tower! The neighbors in King's Landing to the south of Canada put the Mad King into power. And suddenly the Liberal Party of Canada saw an opportunity. They thought, what if we told the Canadian people that we did not destroy this country for the last 10 straight years? What if we said it was all the Mad King's fault? And what if we also said that the only party that can save this country is the one who has already destroyed it? It was a bold strategy, and it worked. Mark Carney is then touted by the media as the prince that was promised to protect Canada against the Mad King. Pierre Poilievre tanks in the polls. All Canadians above the age 50 are now heavily in favor of the status quo Liberal Party again. Meanwhile, the young voters are still largely in favor of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party. So the lead up to the election happens. Mark Carney and the entire status quo establishment versus Mr. Slogan himself, Maple MAGA Pierre Poilievre. They battle back and forth, throwing jabs at one another, essentially representing the younger versus older generation. A battle between two titans, and also a French guy and the other Liberal Party leader. All for the title for who will be the king in the north. And the winning party was that of the status quo. The older voters completely outnumbered the younger ones. Pierre Poilievre did get a record amount of votes for the Conservative Party, especially with those under the age of 40, but the older generation was just too big of a giant undead army to overcome. So just to put this into perspective for everyone, this was the first time in Canadian history where the young voters voted for the Conservative candidate. And if you were to take a look at what each age bracket cared about when they were voting, you will see why many young Canadians are deciding to leave the country. And be prepared, because for non-Canadians, this might be quite shocking. The data from the Abacus polling showed that the top issue for those 60 and older was Donald Trump. And keep in mind, the 60-plus voter base was arguably the largest voting base in all of Canada. For those under the age of 44, it was the cost of living and affordable housing. So now, imagine this. You're an adult in Canada. You just went through a lost decade where the country's economy went from amongst the best in the world to having the worst outlook in the entire OECD. COVID happens, and you think, hey, pandemics are usually good for increasing wages for the middle class. This will be good for Canada in the long run. But to stop that naughty peasant class thinking, the Emperor of Canada and his party decide to erode the currency that your life savings are in. They artificially inflate the assets of the rich to keep the GDP numbers a little bit high, all while flying in 5 million people almost entirely from the country of India so that they can make the labor market much more competitive to keep wages low, while also indirectly increasing the cost of living. One thing to note, if you do not know, is that the immigration system in Canada got so bad that the United Nations called Canada a modern slave nation state. Now, I don't know about you, but I consider slavery to be a bad thing. But in Canada, it is deemed to be necessary by the people in power. So now your savings are eroded, your rent is up almost 40%, you were just laid off from your job at your Canadian company, largely because over half of all Canadian companies are now outsourcing their work to third world countries to save on payroll and to maximize their profits. And yes, that is a real stat. The federal government is running deficits that could bankrupt the country in about 15 to 20 years or so. Now, all this while the over age 60 crowd and the homeowners who are largely out of the workforce decided to vote in a way that says, yes, we need more of this. We like the path that the country has taken over the last 10 years. So I mean, why would anyone want to leave Canada? I mean, it's a literal paradise. If you're old, if you're rich, and if you don't have a job or have to worry about bills or rent or savings or just enjoying life in general. Why would anyone want to spend their life on a beach in a country that has better job opportunities, perfect weather, a much better cost of living, and is much safer when you could work as a peasant for the rich for 4 decades while you endure 6-month winters? This sounds like a great deal. And now I know that every other country has its own problems, and Canada is far from the worst country to live in. But it isn't amongst the best to live in anymore, especially for young people. And that's enough to make hard working class people take a risk and try to move somewhere else in the world. And currently, based on the numbers, Canadians are leaving at amongst the fastest pace that they ever have. Anyways, if you liked this video, click on my documentaries playlist to see more videos just like this, and click on that, and I'll see you guys in my next video in just a few seconds.